I was curious to ask you if you are familiar with somatics, somatically held tension. I'm very excited about that topic generally.
Yeah, it's a good topic. I think it's often one that's a bit overlooked in the traditional way that we approach psychology nowadays. I think CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, just talking to a therapist about your problems and trying to get to the root of them, I think that's mostly where people start and where people stay. You hear it all the time. Oh, I've been in therapy for 5, 10 years or something like that, and just been talking to a therapist, which also has been proven to not work as well or even to not work sometimes because oftentimes you're just venting and venting actually doesn't do anything. If we have an engine that is overheating and we open a vent, yeah, the engine is going to get better, but then we're going to close that vent again and the engine is just going to overheat. We're not addressing the issue. We're just kind of letting some steam out every time that we can. And this is where I think somatic therapy really comes and helps due to a couple of factors. To me, I had to learn somatic therapy because a lot of the therapy work that I've done is with psychedelics, psychedelic assisted therapy. And psychedelic assisted therapy is very in the body. So you need to learn how to work with the body. And what these medicines do is they will enhance your perception of your own body. So if you're feeling anxiety in a certain place or anything, it's gonna 2x, 3x that. So you need to learn how to be with that. You need to learn how to identify that. You need to learn how to not escape from that. And that's where I think somatic therapy really comes in. And there's also studies about this. It's proprioceptive perception, I think it's called. The more aware you are of your own body, the less likely you are of having mental illness such as depression or anything else. And a big reason for this is because we've become so detached of our bodies. We process so many things intellectually that these emotions are kind of just running amok in the body and we don't realize them. And I think a great story to explain this is most people have heard about the story with the lion and the thorn, where there's a lion in the jungle and it's angry and it's attacking everyone. And then a human comes and somehow finds it to get close to the lion and sees that he has a big thorn on his paw. And when he removes the thorn, the lion calms down and is back to his normal self. I think this is a great example of how a lot of people leave their lives. We have these pains where we can't really identify where they are and they just run our lives. And this happens a lot with a lot of people. For instance, one day you'll have a really relaxing day, a day that really takes your guard down and your body just goes into restoration for the first time in a long long time, and you have this insight of, "Oh, it's this." But those moments only come when we have the luxury of being in silence in a quiet place where we can really listen to our bodies. And for a lot of people, going into the body is actually very scary because going into the body means to feel that emotion fully. And the reason why that emotion is causing all this chaos is because you're running from it in the first place. So you won't want to go to that emotion. Oh, but when I go quiet and I feel my body, I feel anxious and I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. Yeah, that's probably the emotion that's running on the background. So when you go into those places, if you feel like you're having a panic attack, imagine what that's doing subconsciously every moment that you're not noticing that, but it's always present because it doesn't go anywhere until it's processed.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. By the time that I discovered forms of somatic therapy, I also realized that just talk therapy might be touching only literally 20%. Uh, Reason being that talk therapy requires cognition, conscious processing. So we have the same brain that is causing this tension, processing this tension, and then putting this tension into words and communicating it. So it's like we are asking from the company that is being audited to audit itself and then produce the report of itself. The example you gave about venting is very spot on. And I noticed that particularly in men. Of course, that's not only a male thing, but men tend to be, at least in my practice, hypercognitive. Even if they speak about their feelings, you notice sometimes that the way they're speaking about them is so polished, so perfect, that something doesn't make sense entirely. Um, it's like an extremely tidy way of speaking about their feelings, and you notice this intellectualization when they self-analyze, and they do that in a very eloquent way. And lots of junior therapists tend to believe that. They don't get it, and especially if you have to do with a highly intelligent client, it's quite easy to be fooled by that. Another thing that happens pretty frequently, at least in my practice, which is a school for me, that's why I mention it all the time, is you might have a client that wants to please you. So you have reached some level of therapeutic alliance, and there is some transference, which makes some clients say the thing that they think you want to hear. So there is ultimately a lot of recycling of the same patterns just being projected into the coach or the therapist. And I mention that because I want to reinforce your point that just talk therapy, sometimes it can even mislead the conversation. It's not only a 20% of the job, but it can also be misleading. I'm a big supporter of more holistic approaches. One of them is somatics, and especially what I'm focusing at is somatic shaking, which is very relevant to what you said, but also trauma approaches like EMDR, which pretty much work in the same way as somatics. I'm not yet finished with EMDR, but I have done EMDR and I'm studying it, still not certified. What does EMDR do? It tries to reconcile memories, reconcile all the bits of a memory. You are keeping one part of the memory, the conscious part, and you are intellectualizing. But then there are other parts of that memory that are being scattered across your brain. Maybe a smell is part of the memory. Maybe the sensation of the body is part of another memory. So it tries to reconcile all that so that you relive it, you remember it, and you desensitize it. What we call in psychology desensitization, which is the mother of getting over trauma. The way to get over trauma or a fear is to experience it and desensitize from it. So this is what EMDR does. And this is what somatic therapy does ultimately. And I'm pretty sure that while I'm talking, you might find a lot of parallels with psychedelics therapy because the principles are the same. I want you to tell me about that. What in somatic shaking and somatic therapy through shaking and tremor? We ultimately try to remember and get conscious of states that are being linked with somatic tension. And for me, that was a breakthrough in therapy and coaching because I might be talking with someone for quite some time, but then we have a session of somatic tremor, and not even talking about the relief because the nervous system literally releases tension, but mostly the value comes from what you mentioned about resistance in the body. So in lots of cases, when someone starts tremoring, they might relieve feelings of panic or tension. And of course, there are techniques to understand where is the tension and is it a little bit. But when you release from one part of the body, typically what happens is another part of your body gets tense. And this is exactly what you mentioned, the resistance. You are afraid to go there. And typically what we do and what we advise is that you shouldn't push it. And a lot of people, both cognitively, but also in somatic shaking, I guess also in psychedelic therapy, they get into this process with expectations. But when you get into somatic therapy with expectations, you're putting ego in the process. And ultimately, you're pushing the body to release something that is not ready to release. So you are both one, but also two. It's like it is your body, it is your subconscious, it is your memory, but in the same time, there is something involuntary in this whole thing because you have involuntary shaking, but it's also sort of voluntary. Like the body is guiding you hand by hand towards what it's ready to do and what is not ready to do. At least that's my experience with myself and clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you said a lot of wonderful things. I particularly like the part where you mentioned the pushing through. That happens a lot in psychedelic therapy because to me they're the same. You can't really do amazing psychedelic therapy without the somatic part. It's very common. A lot of people will go into psychedelic therapy and experience, and they'll have a lot of thoughts, and then they'll come out of it like, "Oh, I know what I need to do because the mushrooms told me this or this sort of thing." And I'm not saying it doesn't work for some people. They get the insight that they needed to change their life. Oh, I need to stop looking at porn. I need to stop drinking, or I need to love my parents more. Amazing. And it changes their lives. Perfect. But what you see in people that have repeated psychedelic therapy and they keep getting these insights and nothing changes is usually because you're retreating to the mind. And retreating to the mind usually means that you have an emotion that's so powerful that you really, really don't want to experience it, even when you go into these states. And I think therapy as a whole is the part of pushing through, which I think is also like a very manly thing. It's, I am broken. I need to fix it, burn my entire being so this goes away. And often, where you were trying to address trauma and trying to heal that part or integrate that part of you, right? You're actually adding more trauma to that part because it's like, no, I need this to be gone. And often when you need it to be gone, you're just adding energy into it and it's just not really going to work. So these things have to be approached with care. I always like to think about emotions as either scared animals or kids, because if you're going to talk to a kid, he's done something wrong. A, if you explain it logically, he's not going to understand. He's like, you're just throwing adult words at me. I don't know what that is. B, if you try to lessen him and criticize him, he's just going to feel bad. So he's going to retreat and he's going to do the same thing. Three, if you come with understanding and a certain level of compassion, there's a space for you to exist here as you are. I think that's what works. And then that can touch also on expectations. I think whether it's CBT, somatic therapy, psychedelics, people will go into therapy with an expectation of who they want to be after, right? But that expectation is also what keeps you from becoming whoever you want to be. Because as long as that expectation exists, there's a denial of who you are right now. And as long as there is a denial of who you are right now, you can't become something else because the only way to transform is the full acceptance of whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you are right now. So it's kind of like, I I know that I should be better. I know that I could be more successful. I know that I could be this, could be that, blah, blah, blah. That's just shame. That's just literally a shame narrative that you're talking yourself into. But if I only fix this, yeah, but guess what? That same emotion, the more that you say that is feeling unaccepted and it's just going to grow. So it's going to cause even more chaos. So usually what we need to do is, and somatic therapy really helps us do this, right? Is we need to face the emotion. Like you said, it's the desensitization. But the desensitization, it's successful when we realize that the emotion that we were trying to avoid will not kill us. It will not break us. Because often what the psyche is afraid of is a death, not necessarily a physical death, but a death of a dream, a death of a narrative, a grief that wasn't processed. It's the completion of a certain process. So, in a lot of ways, until it's understood and integrated and accepted, it will do its best to stay alive as much as possible. And the longer that it's alive, the longer that it will cause chaos in the subconscious. And going into somatics and psychedelics, both approaches allow us to feel the emotion in a spectrum that is hopefully able to contain that emotion. What I mean with this is, let's say a lot of people struggle with anxiety, right? And they'll go into the somatic process. And I'm feeling this tension in my chest. And let's go with the panic attack. And this is the part where it gets tricky, right? Because if you push through it, it's going to turn out bad. You're probably going to have a panic attack and it'll be like, I'll never want to do this in my life. You just 2x whatever you're trying to fix. And this is why it's so important to have really a good practitioner, a good therapist, right? If you are able to kind of stay in that range where you're feeling the emotion, the more that you're feeling that emotion in a contained state, you're still yourself, you're still feeling safe, the more you will find that your nervous system calms down towards that emotion. It's the desensitization process happening. And you do that long enough, at one point, the emotion kind of disappears. One of my mentors, he told me the full feeling of an emotion is its own funeral pyre, right? So when we feel the emotion completely, we allow it to go away and really let go. And we are, at least in my opinion, not really built to harbor and carry emotion everywhere we go. We're meant to feel it and then let go. And that's for sadness as much as it is for happiness. And I've said this, I think, over our last 2, 3 calls, that the same thing, Carl Jung, the depth of our grief is the depth of our happiness. But if we're holding on to either one, it really work. I'm on the same page with everything that you said. Yeah.
I was thinking that this is why sometimes I don't agree with mainstream psychology, mainstream psychotherapy, the way it is practiced. Because in psychotherapy, what I've been taught is that you should always serve the client's request. And of course, if the client wants to update the request afterwards, again, you should honor it. I understand that psychology has, let's say, some boundaries to guarantee certain level of quality, but in reality, it's like you're teaching an art as a technical skill, and that doesn't work because at the end of the day, psychotherapy requires the skill of adjusting according to who you have in front of you. Why I mention that? Because in lots of cases, exactly what you said, lots of my clients come and their basic request is that I help them achieve the outcome of their shame. For example, one might be a high achiever and they might have a difficult time in their career at the moment, and they might come and ask me, help me not feel like that. But the same person is not ready to confront the system that is causing that. So ultimately, I disagree fundamentally with the request because the request, if I would create it for them, would be help me accept that I feel like that. Help me accept that I am that. Or, or even better, help me feel worse so that I feel better. Help me face that, not stop feeling that. Now, are any therapist in the position to dictate what your request will be as a client in therapy? No, absolutely not. And it falls into the relationship that you have with your client to try to gently influence the request that they're coming with because it might be fundamentally wrong to influence that request so that we don't intervene to their psychotherapeutic journey and you take the lead because then we are dealing with your counter-transference. But what I've noticed, and now I connect it, is that the best teacher for those things is our body. What body is teaching is not just, you know, things that you don't see, but it also teaches you how you should approach those things. What do I mean by that? That is my personal experience, but also clients' experience. When you see your body involuntarily, but sort of voluntarily, it's something in the middle. It shakes by itself, but in the same time, you just feel that it tells you to move to certain places. You just feel that the body is asking you to move. This is literally how the subconscious works as well. It is here, it is sort of guiding our decisions, but we don't understand it. It just feels like someone is telling us something, whispering something to the ear and manipulating our decisions all the time. But we don't hear it. It just happens very, very, very slowly. That's how the nervous system and the body works as well when it comes to somatic therapy. It has its own entity, but in the same time, it's us. So that is the first big teaching from the process. The teaching against intellectualization, the teaching that you have to let go of your intellectual processing of your things, the teaching that you have to just tell me or try to hear or try to understand the extremely simplistic things that you are feeling, which means that when you're telling me in therapy or in coaching that you are experiencing your shame, blah, 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 and all the psychological words that you have read somewhere, I don't buy that. And probably it's not the truth either, because at the very core, what you, me, and everyone is feeling is extremely basic. It has the simplest words possible. When you're using all these fluffy words, I understand that you are intellectualizing, but what can teach you here? Your body can teach you, because when you're doing the shaking and you're experiencing tension in the stomach, for example, and I can ask you, what is that tension? And you tell me, I feel fear. I believe that answer, because that is a true answer. That is a simple answer. I feel fear. And then we might explore what fear is. And then we might also explore that thing cognitively again. Now we turn into cognitive, but the cognitive is fueled by somatic. Cognitive therapy fueled by somatic is what works best for me, because when we get some tension that you have experienced, and then I ask you, okay, is that tension familiar? What does it strike? And then always, 10 out of 10 times, they go to childhood. I don't do it in purpose. They just do it themselves. And they remember that that feeling on the shoulders or that feeling on the stomach reminds me of when my mom was asking me trap questions. So every time that someone asks me a question, I feel like I must give the right answer. Therefore, I tend to lie. This is literally a quote from a client. Like, I tend to lie because every time I feels like I will be caught, because that's what I'm trained from my parents, that they ask trap questions. And that feeling in the stomach reminded me of that. So then we have something to work on that is less intellectual and more real. So that is the first teaching, the teaching of letting go and simplifying your thoughts and just follow them in the simplest possible way, and let your body and your brain guide you towards that process without trying to control it. That's the first. The reason that I call these teachings is because literally they improve the quality of talk therapy that I do. Because frequently when I speak with clients and we do trauma related exercises, I remind them, do you remember when your body was shaking by itself? Sorta. And they're like, yeah, okay, this is exactly how I want you to tell me how you feel now. I just want you to spit out impulsively what is it that crosses your mind at the moment. So they do that, and so they abandon the intellectualization process for a little bit. And the second thing is the resistance, which is the second teaching. As you said perfectly, sometimes when you get into solving a trauma with expectation to solve it, you're not letting go. You're ultimately adding more layers to the same trauma, because it's like chicken egg. It's a very meta thing. But when you're trying to fix something by controlling it, you are resisting to the fix. You are resisting letting go and experiencing it. It's the exact opposite process. So when someone lets go to somatic shaking or somatic therapy, and they have to let go and they see their body reacting in ways that they didn't expect, or concentrated tension that leaves the body without talking about it, or memories that come up because I experience the tension on my chest, and they realize how the cognitive part of their brain is literally misleading all of us, including them. I'm extremely, I feel blessed to discover somatic therapy stuff for myself. I remember the first time that I did somatic shaking, I had the same breakthrough as when mushrooms worked on me, first time they worked. And of course, I will have more. But the breakthrough was something extremely simple. When we process trauma and when we process memories, we process them in a post-production way. Like, we process the post-production of these memories. We might even process the summary of these memories, or we might process certain bits. And of course, our brain doesn't remember a lot of bits. And the bits are super simple. For example, when I did somatic shaking, I felt something on my body that reminded me a specific posture that I was taking on a specific place at my house when I was feeling very tense. And I even remembered what I was looking, like the whole memory came. But if I would ask you, do you remember when you were a child, like a very specific tension that you had on your body at your bed at a specific time that something was happening? You wouldn't remember that. You would only remember it if you re-experience that tension and it reminds you that. But that goes back to EMDR again. If you don't remember that tension, you don't remember the trauma. You don't really experience the trauma. We cannot desensitize because you don't remember. You only remember the polished post-production part of the whole thing, which is the intellectualized version of it. So we're not really re-experiencing it. We're not really desensitizing it.
I think to touch on the last part, it's the narrative. Usually when I am going through my own somatic therapy or psychedelic therapy, and I notice myself going into explanation of explanation. I feel like this because this happened. Now I understand this, etc. I have a practice of just telling myself I'm going into narrative and really shutting down that process really quickly because it doesn't serve me in any way. I can't remember who said it, some Greek guy in ancient history, but we can't expect the tool that has gotten us to a certain place to be the same tool that will lead us to the next place. And I think it's often that we will think that the mind is the answer for everything. We've been taught that way. You know, you go into school, no one teaches you these things. It's all memorize, learn frameworks, learn this, learn that. It's all in the brain. And often the more somatic part is actually a bit devalued, which is exercise. If kids don't want to exercise, they'll be like, okay, don't worry, you can just sit out. This happens a lot. But what we don't realize is even exercise is a somatic way of releasing tension. I've had a lot of very spiritual friends that did not go to the gym for a long, long time. And when they went to the gym, they actually told me, oh, it's actually a very therapeutic process because we're engaging with the body. We're holding on and releasing tension, holding on, releasing tension. So a lot of these things, small exercises that we can do, not necessarily just the gym, but on our day to day, how does it feel to truly go into the body, grabbing that tension and letting go? How does that feel? Not in the brain, like, am I holding, am I doing it right, etc. No, just clench your fist. How does that feel? Does that trigger any emotion that, and then letting go and just kind of getting used to this. Most people don't have that proprioceptive perception. So I think it's very important. And I think there's also something to be said about the therapeutic process between the client and the therapist and how there is this kind of conflict almost between what the client thinks they want and what the client thinks they need. And this is getting into personal opinion, but to me, my best experiences with therapists have been when therapists have been able to mirror my state of mind to get it back to me, not in the sense of I'm giving them something and they give me something back. It's more I give them something, that something comes back to me, and I'm able to process it through that channel. I think when you have the relationship of I'm giving you something and you give me something, then the information itself is kind of getting, let's say, muddied, right? Because it's no longer me, it's me plus one. It's me plus the input or output, the experiences of the other person. So, for instance, I'm very against a therapist saying something like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. Of course, if it's somatic exercises, like, hey, you should be doing 10 minutes of breath work every day. Okay, that's good. But you should break up with your spouse or you should leave your job, etc. I think we get into very unethical territory because you're basically giving someone life advice out of your own experience. And we don't know where the other person is, how they feel, etc. That's just a tiny small side note on the therapeutic process. What I did also really like is your share with the client of the stomach and the trap. And then I think that's just such a profound learning, such a profound insight to have, that literally could change your life when you realize that that emotion has been running subconsciously and that's why you do X, Y, and Z. But the real challenge then becomes I feel that emotion. How do I rewire the new behavior? Right? Even though I'm feeling this, how do I want to act despite feeling this? And it's not that you go against the emotion, it's that you reframe it. It lives inside you in a new light, and perhaps a light that can actually serve you versus one that doesn't. But yeah, I think that reframe process is really important and often can only be done via somatic therapy. One thing that people often don't realize when we're talking about the body, you said there's this kind of whisper, right? It's quite profound if you have that experience. We have the mind and the body. And one of my favorite images in the internet, if you go and check how the brain actually works and the nervous system, the brain is just connected throughout the body. So the brain actually lives through all the way down to your feet. Yeah, the mass of it is in your head, but that doesn't mean that's the only place where it operates. So the body is actually the mind, and the mind is actually the body. It's all holistic for us as conscious, ego driven creatures. It's easier to imagine it that way. And when I say ego driven, it's not a negative. We're ego driven just because the ego allows us to experience this reality. But a really good way to see how this enacts in the background is through the way that we interact in relationships and attach to other people. So, for instance, you're dating someone new and you call them and they don't pick up, and you call them again and they don't pick up. Notice what kind of thought comes up. If the thought is, I did something wrong, is it something happened to them? Is it they must be busy? That thought alone will show you which emotion is actually coming upwards or which emotion is currently present towards that person. And of course, right now we are talking about attachment styles and abandonment and that sort of thing. But abandonment is effectively an emotion that resides in the body. It doesn't really leave. It's just a pattern that we acquire when we're relating to other people. But notice how that emotion that is trapped, stuck, is actually deciding what you were going to think, the thoughts towards other people. The same thing can happen with friendships. Actually, this is very common in the business world where people have been manipulated or lied or scammed and they don't process that. And then they go with that emotion in the body towards other business relationships. And you'll see the way that that will frame your conscious behavior is you'll always be suspective of someone. And that's because your entire emotional body is on guard. You're playing defense. So these are just tiny insights. Sometimes we think, oh, our thoughts are the ones that are leading the boat, let's say, that are commanding everything. And this is where action starts. It's often the opposite. It's where everything else already translated ends in a thought. So the thought is like the last iteration of a whole process. It's the last part where you actually get to see what the body is cooking up. And often it goes through input. The body feels it first. Your senses process it first. It goes through the emotional body, through whatever you already have there. And then the output goes into the brain and goes like thought. And you think, no, I have complete independence on what I am thinking about this event and what I'm perceiving, etc. No, not really. You're already seeing it through a lens that you are completely unaware of.
I don't know if you have read that, if it's experiential. There is a paper about that. I was watching a video of a psychologist saying exactly what you told, that ultimately the thought is not the beginning of that. I'm sure I will butcher it at the moment, but here's how I kept it. Between an actual perception of reality and the thought, there's some time lag. So we experience consciously the thought, and we think that it was that the thought and the perception of reality happen in the same time. Therefore, we tend to believe from that our conscious thoughts are the active processing of reality. But the processing of reality has already happened, it has concluded, and then the thought comes after. And that fits exactly what you said. it is official that we have the illusion of processing our reality through our thoughts and with our thoughts, because the reality is already processed before and determined for us. I don't want to be arrogant, but since I discovered the somatic stuff, talk therapy feels completely inadequate. Completely inadequate. I question my own past therapy since I discovered that. I mean, generally, psychology recently tends to rewrite itself in many aspects. We have neglected men's psychology, like the whole psychology playbook is based on mostly 80% on female psychology. We have completely neglected somatics. We don't really know how the brain works. The trauma focused therapies are some form of extra certification that you're getting, while it should be the base knowledge of what you're doing. I don't know how you can call yourself psychotherapist if all you can do is some basically CBT tactics, some mirroring, some reframing. I don't know how you can call yourself a therapist if you don't know about body, if you don't know about trauma, if you cannot treat those things. I remember literally a few weeks ago when I did some somatics to a client. I have a very sweet client that came to visit me, and we had a little walk, and then we did our session in the nature. And I don't always do somatics with people. I always only do somatics when there is already trust and alliance between us, because it's a little awkward, especially if I do it remotely. I might ask you to completely restructure your screen and then lie down and open your legs and spread your hips. That tends to get a little funny and awkward. So unless we know each other, I don't. But we met and we started doing it. And you saw the guy who started shaking like crazy. And he was he was telling me that he felt the tension on the stomach exactly like when he had a panic attack. He was very enthusiastic about it. Like, I remember that feeling. Oh my, that he was enthusiastic by the tactic and what the tactic was revealing. And then he was greedily trying to inflict that even more to the body with expectation and ego, which is extremely aligned with the reason he comes to my practice. You discover so many things through the body, so many things. And I cannot even imagine about psychedelics, which is a topic I have only scratched a little bit, mostly experientially. But it would be, I think if you agree, it can be our next topic. Have you tried somatic shaking yourself?
Yeah. I've had a few sessions. They were pretty good. If you find something that works, then you squeeze that as much as possible. But for me, in my own journey, I tried a lot of stuff that didn't necessarily work. For 4 or 5 years, I thought CBT was the only therapy that existed, and that's what I did. And then I tried hypnosis. Somatic definitely helped, but it was the somatics and psychedelics combined that worked really wonders for me. But when I started psychedelic therapy, I thought, oh, this is it. This is it. Everyone needs to do it. And as I matured through my process, I'm like, no, this is for some people, but it's not for everyone. And I think different options of therapy you can have is exactly the same. CBT is for some people, it's not for everyone. But what's important is for people to know that they have
A
that,
range of tools.
yeah, versus when we speak therapy, people instantly think, oh, that's sitting down and talking to someone versus so many options that you can go with. And to me, it really doesn't matter which one you choose as long as it works. But also, what's the definition of working, right? Where do we want to get to? And then this comes at talking to the therapist and really outlining the goals, et cetera, in a way that is sustainable for the client's psyche, that they're not just putting their ego into it. Like, I'm in therapy because I want to become a multimillionaire. Okay, let's go down that path. And why do you want to become a multimillionaire? What does that mean to you? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, really, where is that coming from versus achieving the external goal that the client thinks they need in order to feel a certain way or escape a certain way of feeling? Nowadays, the tools, you have them at your disposal. It's really about Are you willing to explore that? Are you willing to open up and really go through all these different paths of seeing it? And every single one teaches you certain things. For instance, I've learned something on hypnosis. There was this therapist I had. He was a CBT guy, but he was an expert at cognitive reframing. And well, different therapists will specialize in individual things. And you can learn a lot from those different ways of practice. And I do agree with you that psychology is constantly reinventing itself. For instance, I am of the opinion that if we look at the lens of just the Freudian aspect, I am because what happened. Nowadays, we're already finding that just that alone doesn't allow you to see the full spectrum of whatever you're trying to go through. I particularly like Adler's approach of I am because something is happening in the present that allows me to be X, Y, and Z. And then just a small note that I found very interesting. You said that the psychology has been mostly on women, and it's because women are more prone to actually be open to go to therapy, which speaks volumes about men.
To the therapy the way it is designed at the moment.
Yes,
Because when
yes.
therapy only means talk
CBT, yeah,
about your
yeah,
feelings, then of course it's not a welcome environment for a lot of men that don't have the same vocabulary.
yeah, 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 yeah.
I was
It's
watching a
general.
video from Dr. K the other time, and he was literally saying that he develops a wheel of emotions for guys because the wheel of emotions for guys is totally different. It involves even different words. Men don't identify with the wheel of emotions that you can find online. Or even if they do, they have to push themselves. And I see it in my practice. Like they struggle to find a feeling. For example, a very common feeling that guys report is feeling a failure. I feel like a failure. There isn't a toe for toe feeling to describe that in the wheel of emotions. This is a very man thing.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
I feel less. That's super, super common. I don't find it. Just it's not there. So
No,
they
that's
will be
very
like,
true.
I guess I feel that. That's what they will say from the wheel of emotions.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. For instance, one of the things that kind of teaches us to abstract from our feelings is from a very young age, we feel something in the body. Maybe you're a kid and you're about to give a presentation to your class, and you turn to your teacher and you say, I'm feeling something in my chest that's uncomfortable. And one teacher says, oh, that's excitement. And the other teacher said, that's anxiety. See how that is going to reframe your entire life. You know, we are taught to put labels on what we're feeling, but who's exactly giving us these labels? So we need to abstract from whatever labels we learn to put in the feeling and just feel the feeling itself as fully as it is. It doesn't matter what label we're putting on it. Is it anxiety, excitement, sadness, grief, etc.? Who cares? It's there. It needs to be processed. So that's what I would finish with. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was an amazing conversation. See you next week.